welcome to Americans for Limited Government live stream. Joining me today is Larry Sand. He is president of the California Teachers Empowerment Network. Larry is a former school teacher himself, but he's working right now in a space to be an advocate for teachers and also for parents. There's a lot in that space right now in terms of reform, parents asking for changes, demanding more say in what's happening in the classrooms. And a lot of this is coming out as a result of the lockdowns that we saw, obviously, during the pandemic. So thank you, Larry, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Catherine. Thank you for having me.
So what caught my attention, first of all, was about a week ago, you had a piece in American Greatness, which I'll share with on our screen here in a minute, but basically exposing the heavy-handed measures that unions used during the pandemic. And you showed how these unions were really driving policy that was keeping children home. And you looked at some of the effects of that on mental health. So why don't you tell me a little bit about that first piece and what you learned about the union's role in these lockdowns?
Okay, there have been several studies done which show without a doubt that states and local areas, local school districts where the union has a heavy hand were much more likely to be shut down during the, quote, pandemic, end quote. And this, as you point out, has had a horrible effect on children. And yeah, as I wrote, they have major consequences, and parents are waking up. Now, saying that, I just have to point out that not all parents were against the shutdowns, but many parents were against the shutdowns, and those parents were out of luck because they had to deal with their kids at home. Some had to leave their jobs, some had to change their job arrangements because all of a sudden the school who was guarding their children from about 8 o'clock to 3 in the afternoon weren't doing that anymore. And as I say, the unions, the teachers' unions had a very heavy hand in doing that.
So going through your article here, the teachers' unions' misbegotten efforts have ignited the push for educational reform. That's your second piece, actually. I really wanted to actually look at that first one. Let's see. The union-mandated school shutdowns are having major consequences. School violence rises. Mental health days proliferate. Thousands of kids are leaving government schools nationwide. So some of this is happening, like in my state, for example, in Virginia, there was a huge pushback from parents, which actually swung the election in favor of a Republican governor, which we've not had in Virginia for a long time, because parents were just so upset with the shutdowns in the schools and how they were being ignored and pushed out.
Right. And well, also in Virginia and elsewhere, as I'm sure you know, it was more than the shutdowns, because Terry McAuliffe infinitely said that parents should have no role in curricular matters. And Youngkin, to his credit, used that to beat Terry over the head with it. And that was as much as anything, as far as I know, why Youngkin won, because McAuliffe made some very, very, frankly, stupid statements that he did, unforced errors. He didn't have to do that, but he did do it, and that cost him the election. And as I say, it's important to note that this is the shutdowns are only part of it. It was because of his basic disrespect for parents, because many parents are upset over the proliferation of the critical race theory. In your state, I believe it's Loudoun County, is pretty much at the forefront of the fight, where parents have just been storming, and I mean that in a very good way, the school boards, demanding to be heard. And it's about time. Parents, for too long, parents have been sitting around waiting and just assuming that their schools are going to do the right thing. Now, when I went to school back in the 1950s, my mother could send me off to school and assume I'd be getting a good education, and I wouldn't be, thrown in with some really radical thoughts, radical theories, whatever. And she was right to do that, because then teachers and parents shared the same values. Unfortunately, it's not always that way now, and parents need to become very active and learn exactly what their kids are being taught and fight back if necessary.
Well, one of the things that you wrote about in your first piece was the rise in mental health problems and in school violence now that kids are back in school. And I wanted to ask you if they have identified that these remote learning experience for children was leading to a rise in mental health. Why are we then now seeing more districts across the country adding remote learning days back in when we already know that there was a lot of negative effects on the children's mental health? What's that all about?
I'm not smiling because it's funny. I'm smiling because it's so ironic that clearly the lockdowns have hurt the mental health of children. There are more fights in schools now. Yeah. Suicides are up, and schools are having a problem dealing with all this. So what are they doing? They're shutting down, 1 day a week. I mean, in Portland, for example, they're closing on Fridays now. In Detroit, no, in Portland is just 4 days a week now. And I think in Dallas, in Detroit, they're having free Fridays this month. So in other words, to deal with the problem of schools closing, they're closing the schools more.
Right.
It's insanity.
And one of the things you pointed out is that teachers are saying they're burned out. And so perhaps this is a mental health day, for teachers, where they're saying we need a day to work remotely. And the teachers and the schools are concerned that there's going to be a teacher shortage, that all these teachers are going to leave in droves. But the data right now doesn't show that teachers are leaving.
That's correct. There are fewer teachers leaving this year than there were in 2019. Right. And not too many people know this because the scare headlines, the good old legacy media is, there's teacher shortages. I mean, there's a teacher shortage every year. The unions love to promote this because they want to get more tax dollars into education. They hire more teachers, they can get more dues. It's a very basic straight line. But no, teachers are not leaving. The kids are leaving, though. I mean, depending on the school district, a lot of kids are leaving.
Yeah, and that is what you wrote about in your second piece. Let's see if I can pull that up so that we can see that. Because you wrote a follow-up piece in which you looked at the number of students leaving across the country. And there's a lot of changes happening there. The parents putting their kids in private schools or choosing to homeschool. That's become something now that this public schools are having to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, what I wrote about that was actually in the first piece, in the December 8th piece, where I just talked about different school districts and kids leaving. And New York, stunningly, they're talking about 180,000, up to 180,000 students, or 18% of the city's 1 million kids could be leaving. I mean, that is a huge loss.
Yes, it's huge.
And I just want to say, and some of the kids are, quote, missing. We don't know where they went, but a lot of kids are being homeschooled now. Other kids have gone to private schools, religious and otherwise. More have gone to charter schools, but basically the government, traditional government schools have definitely taken a hit due to the recent events that we've been talking about.
And you point out that in California, this is leading to calls for vouchers and school charter schools. Is that a part of the reform that people are calling for as well?
Yeah, charter schools are, I don't have the statistics, but there are definitely more kids in charter schools now. And as you mentioned, we have not one, but two school choice initiatives heading for the ballot in 2022, waiting for signatures. We won't know officially, I think, until it's the end of April, sometime in April, whether or not all the signatures, when enough signatures have been gathered and counted, whether or not one or both will be on the ballot next year.
And something you wrote about in your second piece that's been a trend that you noted has been happening over a number of years, but the number of states with education savings account programs, which you call the purest form of funding, where the money follows the student, that has doubled from 5 to 10 this year. And you had a poll here from EdChoice. 83% of children attend government-run schools today. Meanwhile, only 39%, so about half of the parents of all demographic backgrounds would choose to put their kids in public school if they had an option. So there's a lot going on here where parents are showing they are not happy with what the government schools are doing.
Yeah, that 83% who attend, and only 39% of those parents would choose those schools, I think is an amazingly damning
Yeah.
statistic. And yeah, and just to go a little further, you were talking about education savings account. These are the best types of parental choice setups because it puts the money in the parent's hand. A voucher is good, but a voucher goes to the school, and a parent chooses to go to the, XYZ private school, then the money follows the child there. But the educational savings accounts are better because the money can go for more than schooling. A parent can use it to buy textbooks for the children, or maybe get their kids a tutor. There are different ways to do it. They're limited. You can't go out and take a kid to Disneyland or buy a kid a car. I mean, there are rules, of course, but there are many different types of things you can legitimately spend that money on. So it's much more parent friendly, so to speak, an ESA as opposed to a traditional voucher.
So, what are some of the mental health issues that we're seeing in schools today? I know we talked about a rise in violence. I think there was a piece in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal a week or so ago where small things that in the past would have been small, let's say a dispute between two students, have gotten blown up into these, raucous fights in the hallway, and police are called in even in some cases. And some are saying that, look, these kids' mental health is just not where it was pre-pandemic. Small things are setting them off.
Yeah, well, it really depends, but basically it's a case of isolation, detachment, alienation, depression, all of the above. These things cause each other, and it's like the glue has come off, and kids are just acting out. This is what kids do; they act out. Hopefully adults don't act out. When adults act out, we put them in prison. With kids, it's a little harder to do that. So yeah, there are more fights. Teachers are being attacked. Kids are attacking other kids. And it's all related to the shutdowns. It's also a problem, not to veer off, but it's important to note that the anti-campus cop sentiment is not helping things, because now cops are needed more than ever,
right,
to break up fights, to as peacekeepers, and districts are doing the politically correct thing and defunding the police. I mean, which is a bad idea to begin with, but now it's especially stupid, frankly.
Right. And so you're writing about how parents are reacting. They're calling for greater choice. The vouchers. There's a lot of unhappiness with these government-run schools. However, as is to be expected, the teachers' unions are pushing back, and they are putting out sort of list by list going down and trying to say why empowering parents and families is a bad thing. And you're debunking that. So let's look at the fact, what they call, in quotation marks, the facts. According to the union types, they're saying vouchers reduce funding for neighborhood schools, meaning fewer textbooks, teachers, and more overcrowded classrooms. That's false. Tell me why.
It's false because, I mean, if kids leave school, there is less funding, but there's also less kids, fewer kids. So if as I point out, if 50% of the kids leave a school district, and so 50% of the money goes with them, but the same amount of per pupil funding is still there for the kids who are there. So it's an absolutely bogus argument.
And what about their claim that voucher programs are associated with reduced educational outcomes?
That's what we call cherry picking. They take one or two programs, like in Louisiana, and I think in DC, the voucher setup was not good, so they did have poor results. But by and large, as Greg Foster points out, he's a researcher, and he points out that in 19 studies, 14 showed positive results, 2 reported no differences. And because of design flaws in DC and Louisiana, as I said, they did show negative effects. But basically, they've been overwhelmingly, the results have been overwhelmingly positive where school choice has been inaugurated.
And Larry, what about their fact that voucher programs do not work for students in rural areas?
Well, I mean, I didn't even understand that because so then if there's no private school in a rural area, which is certainly true in at least in some rural areas, then the voucher program won't hurt. It won't help. It won't hurt. It's like non-existent, and the kids will continue to go to their local government school. Period. I don't even understand why that's a reason to be against vouchers.
So then number 4 on their fact, this sounds sort of like their fallback for every argument the far left gives. Voucher programs have their roots in discrimination and continue to foster it.
Yeah, well, yeah, as you point out, to the left, everything is racist except
Right?
them. And once again, Greg Foster's pointed out there have been 10 empirical studies done. 9 show a plus for, it shows more integration than without the vouchers, and 1 showed no difference. Not 1 study showed that school choice advanced segregation in any way. Milton Friedman, the godfather of vouchers, was not a segregationist, and he rightly predicted that if we had a choice system, there'd be more integration, and he's right.
Well, Larry, I'm really grateful for what you're doing. It's putting a spotlight on the problems that occurred with keeping kids out of the classroom for as long as they were. And do you think that there will come a time when, or how long in the future maybe, because I think there will come a time when we really have enough data to look at what happened and we can say that was a mistake? Or do you think that the unions will ever own up to it, that it was a mistake, and the lawmakers who were pushing for these school closures, will they ever own up to it? And will we at some point have really concrete data to prove that this should never happen again?
Okay, it's a great question, a great series of questions. Your first question was about, will we ever know? Yeah, I mean, I think we're finding out right now, and as soon as things get fully back to normal, which I hope will be soon, in very short order, we will know. We know about the learning loss so far. We know how much damage the shutdowns have done. We talked about depression and anxiety and kids acting out. Will the unions ever admit to it? Not a chance. No, they never admit that they're wrong about anything. They'll say they were right to do it. Yeah, it was a tough decision, but we saved grandma's, think about Christmas with little kids giving it to grandma and all this garbage. Yeah, no, they'll never admit it. Never.
Well, I just think that I'm glad there's people doing this sort of study, giving us some hard data, and I look forward to the day when all the information is there, policymakers can see, and I really do want someone to be held accountable. I want these people to know how greatly they harmed our children. I mean, my son was a senior. Well, it was his junior year in 2020. And then his senior year was done almost all remotely from home. Oh. And anyway, it was just not ideal. And I know that he didn't get a quality education, and I think his mental health suffered, probably less than other kids maybe, but I mean, the whole thing was just a nightmare. And so for me, it's really personal of how my family was impacted.
Well, I mean, I have a stepson who's in his 30s now, so I wasn't personally affected, but I certainly understand that you were, and yeah, you're one of the many who were, and it's just a shame. It's just a pity. It just wasn't necessary.
Right. Well, thank you. Is there anything else that you want to add, a point you want to make, or how can people find out more about your organization? Or if you're pretty hyper local in California, right? Or are you doing national advocacy as well?
I do both. More California. There's so much here to do, but I write about national issues also. But yeah, my website is c10home.org. That's Charles Thomas Edward Norman home.org. I also have a regular column which appears in the California Policy Center, American Greatness, and elsewhere. I'm pretty widely circular. I'm sorry.
Wait, stand by. What's the website address again? And I'll put it up.
Okay, C10, CTENHOME.org.
All right. So c10home.org. If you're in California, you want to get some real useful tools, practical information to empower you to make changes with your public school system and advocate for your child, check out c10home.org. And thank you very much, Larry, for your time today. And again, thank you for what you're doing, because I know there's a lot of families out there just like me who have struggled and their children have struggled. And we just want to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Catherine. And my final words are, don't give up. That's what they want you to do. Don't give up. Our kids are too important.
Thank you. And I'm going to just ask people, if you like what we're talking about today, follow us on Americans for Limited Government and click the little bell so you get notices when we go live. And thank you, Larry, and thanks to everyone for being with us today.